Order. Tony Vaughan to move the motion.
Thank you, Chair. It is a privilege to serve under your chairship. I beg to move that this House has considered E-petition 751174 calling for the appointment of a Maternity Commissioner to improve maternity care for mothers and babies. I first want to thank the two petitioners, Louise Thompson and Theo Clark, two formidable women and campaigners who have raised this issue relentlessly over several years, and they've done so powerfully alongside many others, including the Birth Trauma Association, MASIC, Make Birth Better, the Maternal Mental Health Alliance, 5 Times More, and Mumsnet. And I also want to thank the 153,000 people who quickly signed Louise and Theo's petition after it was launched, including 203 in my own constituency of Folkestone Hythe and Romney Marsh. Sir Alec, we should remember that most births in the UK are safe. I acknowledge and thank the frontline NHS midwives, nurses and doctors and all across the health service who every day do outstanding work to care for mothers and babies across our nation. At the same time, there are clear, deep-rooted and long-standing problems in our maternity and neonatal services, and I just want to raise 4 statistics on that. The first is that UK maternal death rates are one of the highest in Western Europe, and stillbirth rates are high. 2, in that context, the NHS currently spends more on payouts for medical negligence than on the entire frontline maternity service budget, which is money that should be going into frontline care and safer care, not litigation. 3, according to the Care Quality Commission's latest national review of maternity services, covering inspections between 2022 and 2023, almost half of the maternity units it inspected were rated requires improvement or inadequate, and only 4% were rated outstanding. 4th, over the past 2 decades, we've seen a heartbreaking succession of maternity scandals across Morecambe Bay, Shrewsbury and Telford, East Kent, which is serving my constituency, and now Nottingham. The patterns are the same. Women raised concerns, said something was wrong, that they were in pain or frightened, and they were not then listened to. A failure of listening runs through every major maternity report of the last decade, alongside often unsafe care, a toxic culture, and weak oversight, which are reflected in, I think, around 750 recommendations in those various reports. Unfortunately, those were the experiences of the petitioner, Louise Thompson, who was denied a C-section despite advocating for one, resulting in a massive obstetric hemorrhage. My constituent Jo Page also experienced these systemic failures. Her son was born at William Harvey Hospital in Ashford some years ago. A birthing injury was misdiagnosed and she didn't receive the treatment she ought to have received for what was in fact a 4th degree tear, and she did not receive the right support. And as a result, she's suffered years of pain, indignity, and cannot stand for long periods and needs to use the toilet frequently. As a result, she has had to give up her career, cannot do normal things like taking a flight just to go on holiday, and her life has been utterly changed. Now, she works now with MASIC, mothers with anal sphincter injuries, running a support group for local women in Folkestone and Hythe and the wider Kent area. And she also trains midwives and doctors in correctly diagnosing tears, and was recently involved in a Sky News film, The Women Who Weren't Listened To, which tells the traumatic stories of 3 mothers cared for in NHS England hospitals. I wanted to say to Jo that you are truly inspiring, and I know the whole House would express their thanks for all the work that you are doing for women up and down the country. I spoke to Jo last week, and she told me that she continues to receive messages even now from women who have experienced misdiagnosis and not feeling listened to in their birthing experiences. These included a police officer and a social worker who, in their individual cases, had been so badly injured during birth that they had to give up their careers, have got into debt and have suffered immeasurably. And I'm sad to say that a constituent contacted me just last month who experienced the very same failings they had read about in the Kirkup report on William Harvey's maternity services. When I spoke to the petitioner Louise Thompson last week, she said she is constantly hearing from women with postpartum physical injuries, mental health issues, and know people who have committed suicide following maternity service and postpartum system failures. She also spoke of the profound strain on partners who must simultaneously support a recovering mother, assist in caring for a newborn, and continue work all at the same time. She pointed out that a third of women experience birth as traumatic and 4 to 5% develop post-traumatic stress disorder every year, which is around 30,000 women in the UK. And the impact of trauma can last a lifetime, affecting a mother's bond with her baby, relationship with her partner, her ability to work, and her long-term mental health. So, Sir Alec, why is this happening? The petitioners believe that one key reason is a lack of unified leadership and consistency across maternal care in the UK, which is long-standing and has been that way for many years. When the petitioner Theo Clark was the Honourable Member for Stafford, she chaired the first ever birth trauma inquiry with the Honourable Member for Canterbury, who heard from 1,300 patients, including those from marginalised communities and professionals, about their experiences of maternity services across the 4 nations of the UK. And that inquiry was prompted by Theo Clark's own traumatic birth experience, which he bravely and publicly spoke about in the House of Commons, describing it as the most terrifying experience of her life. In submissions to that inquiry, mothers reported being mocked or shouted at, being denied the most basic assistance, such as pain relief, and left feeling terrified, humiliated and ashamed, and the word broken appeared more than any other. The inquiry's May 2024 report was called Listen to Mums, Ending the Postcode Lottery on Perinatal Care, and its 14 recommendations were headed by a call on the UK government to publish a national maternity improvement strategy led by a new Maternity Commissioner reporting to the Prime Minister. The petitioners believe that these measures would fill in a void. Yes.
Thank you. I'm most grateful to my honourable friend for giving way and also for calling this important debate. And I have to also say I'm very grateful to my constituent, Louise Thompson, for having the guts and the decency to parlay what was an absolutely horrible experience for her into a determination to make lives better for women across this country and to improve maternity services for everybody. And I'm very grateful for what she's doing, and that she's here today. I'll very much welcome that. I also, I'm a member, as my honourable friend may be aware, of the Health Select Committee, and we did recently a report on black maternal health, and much of the things you've described came out in that committee. There is a huge amount to be done. As regards making the changes and then making them stick, I very much support his support for having a National Maternity Commissioner to drive this through. But does he have any thoughts that if the government isn't minded to appoint a Maternity Commissioner, how else do you think we might get the drive and the determination to make the changes stick right across government for all time?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his intervention and repeat and echo his comments about the petitioner Louise Thompson and her advocacy on this issue. I think the petitioner's analysis is that, as I'm going on to say, is that there has been a vacuum of leadership and accountability across the system here. And I know that the government, and we'll hear more from the Minister later, is looking into how best to do that. Certainly, whatever happens, there has to be a structural way of providing that leadership and avoiding the fragmentation and different interpretations of different guidance documents across the system. So there is a very clear systemic change that cures this, because it is a problem that has been ongoing for very many years, and it isn't something which so far an answer has been put forward. But the petitioner Theo Clark told me that an obstetrician in London, and this illustrates the point about perhaps the postcode lottery aspect of this, and this is a very strong belief that the petitioners have, that we need these measures to create expert national leadership and tighten up rules to avoid a postcode lottery. She told me that an obstetrician in London that she spoke to recently told her there are 87 different pieces of guidance which apply in maternity care. And really this doesn't sound like a framework. I think for many people it looks like a kind of disparate number of different documents which really creates a variation in interpretation between different areas. And Theo Clark's strong view is that that leaves a room for interpretation that results in different approaches to care in different areas. And this means, in very practical terms, something as very concrete as training midwives on recognising and treating birthing injuries varies hugely between different areas. And I spoke a moment ago about my constituent who trains midwives on this issue. That training isn't available everywhere, and certainly not in the same way that it's delivered by Mason. Yes.
Just Fuller.
The honourable gentleman for giving way, and he's making a really important point about disparity around guidance. I think it's believed that if you have somebody at the top of an NHS trust who's passionate about maternity care, it's more likely to trickle down, but that's not the same in every trust, and therefore you end up with a postcode lottery. In my area of Chichester, mothers going to give birth would have a totally different experience if they went to Chichester, Guildford and Portsmouth, because they're three totally different trusts with totally different guidance, with totally different rules around when mothers should present or the sort of treatment that they would get when they get to hospital. So does he agree with me that introducing a maternity commissioner would mean that we'd have that strategic oversight across the country as to how the experiences that mothers should expect to have?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. I mean, certainly the petitioner's view is very clear that without that expert oversight, and expert and national level oversight, that there's no way of turning that kind of thicket of different guidance, different frameworks into a sort of coherent, enforceable standard of care. And whatever structural change the government puts forward, it has to do that job. And certainly I spoke to this constituent, Jo Page, earlier, and she was telling me that there are people in Folkestone and Hythe who are going to Tunbridge Wells to access maternity services because of the concerns that they have about the local standards of care. So that obviously has to be fundamentally addressed. Sir Alec, the powerful evidence from the various maternity investigations we have seen show that when everyone is responsible, nobody is accountable. And certainly appointing maternity commissioner could well mean that there is somebody with whom the buck stops, a dedicated expert responsible for turning 750 recommendations or the 87 guidance documents into a single national maternity strategy and to ensure it's implemented. Now, that's not to say that that's the only way that that could be done. Baroness Amos is shortly publishing her report on the national maternity and neonatal investigations in NHS services. The petitioners strongly believe that her report should commit to a maternity commissioner and maternity strategy. And I look forward to hearing from the Minister about how the government currently views that particular proposal. I would also ask the Minister to commit to providing an update on which of the recommendations that have previously been committed to may well be taken forward. But in conclusion, Sir Alec, the government's recent decision to introduce a women's health strategy is hugely welcome and is an important acceptance that women's health has been neglected for far too long. The petitioners strongly believe that it would make a real difference to women giving birth today if that strategy encompassed a maternity commissioner with the authority, expertise and focus to end the postcode lottery in maternity care and break the cycle of avoidable harm once and for all.
I'm grateful for members bobbing to indicate they would like to take part in the debate. The question is that this House has considered E-petition 751174 relating to a maternity commissioner. I call Ollie Glover.
Thank you, Sir Alex. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And can I thank the proposer, the Honourable Member for Folkestone and Hythe, for introducing this very important and sensitive debate with his customary eloquence. I also want to start by thanking the 464 of my constituents, Didcot and Wantage in Oxfordshire, who signed it, placing my constituency in the top 25 constituencies nationally in terms of signatories. I also want to thank many constituents who have been in touch with me and my team about their maternity experiences, many of whom I have met at constituency surgeries. Sir Alec, this debate is so important because of the family and societal importance of safe and reassuring and comfortable pregnancy and childbirth, and all the anxiety and exhilaration that comes with that journey. I know this not from my own experience, but from those of friends as well as constituents. At the funeral of my friends Steve and Yue's stillborn daughter, I have never seen people cry so much or so intensely. They, along with my friend Joel, who also lost a baby, have been superbly supported by SANS, the stillbirth and neonatal charity. They all now have experienced successful births. Sir Alec, I really want to emphasise what this debate should be about and what for me it is about. It is definitely not about criticising hard-working and dedicated individual midwives and health workers who so often do an amazing job in very challenging circumstances. Rather, this is about improving top-level leadership, culture, staffing levels and process that affect maternity units. In my constituency, we have local maternity units in community hospitals in Wantage and Wallingford, and these are welcomed by many constituents rather than the often long journey to Oxford. But otherwise, births happen in Oxford's John Ratcliffe Hospital's maternity unit. I visited the department in September 2025 and was given a comprehensive tour, including their new bereavement ward. I want to thank all the staff I met who are so committed to improving the care there, and the department level leadership I saw was receptive to feedback and acknowledging that care at the John Ratcliffe Hospital has at times gone wrong. This is important given the many constituents who have contacted me about their experiences at the John Ratcliffe Hospital. I've met with a number of constituents who have been affected by traumatic and deeply tragic circumstances of stillbirth, complicated births which have resulted in lifelong serious disabilities for children, and PTSD for mothers or lack of support. And I want to tell some of those constituent stories, and I'm very grateful for their consent to do so. I met Julie Ray at a constituency surgery some months ago. Her granddaughter, Harper Rose, was stillborn at the John Ratcliffe Hospital in May 2023. Julie believes that her death could have been avoided. The mother had a high BMI, which, although highlighted early on in her pregnancy, the midwife-led care she received did not always appreciate the potential for serious complications at birth. She was supposed to receive consultant-led care, but this did not happen, and important decisions were left to midwives. Despite a plethora of maternity guidelines provided by bodies such as NICE, RCOG, and the website perinatal.org.uk, Julie was surprised that there were no more specific and binding rules that hospitals had to follow. Julie wants to see a maternity system in place designed to prevent unavoidable death and injury. She also wants coroner's offices to be used for the post-mortem of babies. Harper's post-mortem was carried out by the John Ratcliffe's own pathology laboratory, which brings concerns of a lack of independence and the potential for unconscious bias. My constituent Anna lost her granddaughter Willow Rain. Anna has met the noble Baroness Amos more than once and is actively engaged in the Amos review, for which all of my constituents have expressed their gratitude, and they have high expectations of that review. Anna's daughter, who was the mother of Willow Rain, wants to see real accountability taken for mistakes. She believes that a blood sugar test should have been done on her baby as per NICE guidelines, and if it had been, Willow Rain would still be here. They question the value of guidelines if hospitals aren't following them, and Anna wants to see a national inquiry into the Oxford University Hospital Trust and the John Ratcliffe Hospital specifically. My constituent Joanna was left to give birth without a midwife or pain relief, so the safe arrival of her children felt to her essentially down to luck rather than due to proper maternity care. She has raised concerns around issues of consent, alongside long waiting times after requesting her notes from the hospital. A constituent who wishes to remain anonymous had birth complications during delivery of her son in 2019, which left him with extremely severe lifelong disabilities. He requires round-the-clock care and cannot meet any of his own needs, and engagement from the Oxford University Hospitals Trust has been lacking to date. And finally, Sir Alec. Natasha and her partner tragically lost their firstborn son, Arlo Huxley Harewood. After experiencing a tremendously difficult pregnancy, she was left alone in a room holding the news of her loss, feeling, and I quote, feeling fear-mongered when informed that if things turned, she would need to go for an emergency C-section under general anaesthetic with a tube down her throat. I quote, "I was being prodded and poked for blood samples, a catheter fitted, introduced vaginally, given a blood transfusion, asked to sign away and deliver my past baby boy, thankfully, naturally. Aggravatingly, a few days after the birth of her stillborn child, there was mention of HELLP syndrome when she was on the bereavement ward. She has been left with feelings of self-blame, which no grieving mother should ever have to go through." As we've heard, this petition is part of a wider campaign being led by the former Conservative MP for Stafford East, Theo Clark, and reality TV star Louise Thompson, and I join my constituents in thanking them for their work. This year, the two launched a petition to appoint a Maternity Commissioner to improve maternity care for mums and babies. The 2024 inquiry, led by the Birth Trauma APPG and Theo Clark, recommended a Maternity Commissioner to be appointed, alongside a national maternity strategy to ensure mums and babies were safe and looked after with professionalism and compassion. A maternity commissioner would oversee and introduce past recommendations. And advocates have emphasised that a maternity commissioner is necessary to restore public confidence in the NHS maternity services and to ensure accountability. On average, a woman gives birth in the UK every 56 seconds, yet 1 in 3 women in the UK describe their childbirth experience as traumatic, and sadly, post-traumatic stress disorder affects 1 in 20 mothers after giving birth. The rate of women dying during or soon after pregnancy in the UK has increased by 20% over the last decade, a trend which I'm sure we're all concerned about. A 2024 Care Quality Commission report, based on an inspection of 131 maternity units, found that 65% of maternity units are not safe for women to give birth in. They found that 47% of trusts require improvement in safety, and a further 18% are rated inadequate. They said, and I quote, "We are concerned about the potential normalising of serious harm in maternity." I'm pleased that Liberal Democrats have launched a maternity rescue package to make Britain the safest country in the world to have a baby, with high quality care wherever we live. It is much in common with what the petitioners are calling for, and we hope that they will be encouraged that many of us in Westminster are listening. A National Maternity Commissioner would oversee improved standards of care nationally, while a Director of Midwifery would be appointed in every maternity service, alongside an extra 300 consultant midwives to drive clinical excellence. It would also see specialist doctors present on every maternity unit 24/7 and provide one-to-one midwifery care to every woman during labour. This would ensure it is no more dangerous to give birth at night or at a weekend as at any other time. And previous research found that 73% of maternity units in England do not have a consultant present at night, despite most births taking place outside of working hours. And many negligence claims for poor maternity care are linked to failings in care outside of regular working hours. Moving to my conclusion, Sir Alec. Too many families have been affected by birth trauma, and reform is desperately needed. Since 2015, there have been many national reviews into the safety of maternity services, as well as high-profile investigations into care at individual maternity trusts and calls for a national inquiry into maternity care. And that is why I welcome the Baroness Amos review and believe it will be valuable as a centralising piece of work. But given it is the latest in a string of national and local reviews or inquiries, which together have produced over 700 recommendations, I hope the Minister will enlighten us as to why this review will be different. The review shows so many similar themes: failure to listen to women, lack of time for training and strengthening teamwork between staff, inadequate staffing levels and high levels of burnout, lack of proper assessment, poor management of risk, unsuitable estates, and failure to learn when things go wrong. And what's clear after so many reviews is we need to see improved standards of care nationally. Now, Sir Alec, the recommendation for a maternity commissioner is cross-party and widely supported. My constituents really want to see a clear timeline for when this appointment of a commissioner will be made, if it is something that the government decides to support, so that this time the learning and change will happen. Thank you.
Andy McNay.
Thanks, Sir Alec. It's a pleasure to serve on your chairship. I'll make some comments as the chair of the all-party group for baby loss, but also as a bereaved parent. We lost our daughter Mallory, aged 5 days. And so, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone who responded to the petition. It shows just the massive extent of concern and care for this issue, just how many of us share this as something which is personal and that requires immediate and comprehensive action. For the past 2 years, my all-party group has been listening to families, to parents, to professionals, hearing of a litany of failures across this whole sector. I'm sure many colleagues today will be referencing many of those issues and incidents, so I won't repeat them. But what we have to recognise that these are systemic failures that often go very, very deep within the culture of the health service. We need to recognise that this results in fundamental inequalities in terms of ethnicity and deprivation, families just not being listened to and suffering outcomes that are truly unacceptable. But we also have to recognise that within this there are islands of very, very good practice. That there are trusts, there are professionals who continue to do an amazing job. I can cite the birth centre at Burnley that myself and my honourable friend from the Rural Valley visited recently, where we see how things can be done. We can see what good actually looks like. And it's absolutely clear that there is an undeniable case for urgent and immediate action. I think we all agree on that. But we also, I think, all agree that we cannot repeat the cycle of report, review, recommendations. As my honourable friend has said, 700 recommendations, in many cases exactly the same, time after time. We cannot repeat that cycle, which is why it's so important that Baroness Amos's maternity safety investigation is different. She is, I believe, entirely committed to addressing the underlying systemic issues that exist across the whole sector, to bring forward a report which focuses on those underlying systems and cultures that need to change, and not just repeating the litany of what's gone before, but also, crucially, is the Secretary of State's commitment to a task force to follow on from the work of that review and to actually deliver on those recommendations, and an immediate overlap, an immediate focus on action. And that's why I do believe we've got a fundamentally different opportunity right now to really get this right. And again, that focus on systemic changes needs to be accompanied by a real commitment to fixed and firm targets to reduce harm and to reduce the inequalities that we see today. Of course, oversight and accountability are a fundamental part of that. And of course, we recognise we currently have a bit of an alphabet soup of organisations, CQC, NMC, GMC, the very trusts themselves are essentially autonomous, choosing whether they follow guidelines or not. The change of accountability and oversight needs to be a fundamental outcome of that review. And I'm absolutely sure we'll see clear recommendations around it. But what I would just like to reflect on is that Maternity Commissioner itself is not some sort of magic sticking plaster that can address this fundamental and systemic problem. Let's not fool ourselves that any one single measure, any one single recommendation will solve this problem. We need to see maternity safety rebuilt from the ground up. We need to see cultures there which listen to every single family, every single mother, that treat them all as individuals, that have their own risk factors, their own concerns, their own challenges. We need to learn from the best practices that we see across the country. We need to see, when bereavements do occur, that those parents being treated with the empathy and, again, individualisation that they require, recognising that trauma is not just something that affects someone in the weeks or days after birth. It can affect you lifelong. We need to see the regulators rebuilt to be fit for purpose. We need to see all the mechanisms which hold individual trust to account rebuilt to be fit for purpose. And only when we get those foundations right, rebuilt from the ground up, with best practices embedded across the board, might a Maternity Commissioner possibly be able to deliver the outcomes that we could see. So let's focus on listening to what Baroness Amos comes forward with. Let's focus on delivering those recommendations. Let's focus on rebuilding a culture from the base up. Let's concentrate on listening to individual parents and families. Let's concentrate on responding to their own personal risk factors. And let's make sure we have a maternity safety system that we can all be proud of in the years to come.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Chair. It was a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I congratulate the member for Folkestone and Hythe in bringing this very important debate to the House today. I want to reflect the strength of feeling on this issue among my constituents in Esher and Walton. The 568 people adding their names to this petition from my constituency reflects a very real and deeply felt concern among families in my community about the state of maternity care in this country. I am a mother of 4, and I'm very lucky to have given birth 4 times, but 3 of those were traumatic. One of those was an emergency C-section, number 2 was a VBAC that needed a lot of intervention, number 3 was absolutely fine, and number 4, the crash team had to attend because the midwife failed to listen to what I knew was a problem as a mother, an experienced birth mother. And when I took baby Tom, who is now 14, home with... sorry, would you... Did you... When I took...
Sorry, order. Perhaps it would just be helpful that some members have approached me, they've already spoken to Mr Speaker, that they may need to move around, so they'll ask for an intervention if they would like to move away. So honourable members can give way when a member specifically asks for an intervention.
Thank you, Chair, for that clarification. I'm trying to do my very best on protocol. And as I took baby Tom home, and I hugged ever more tightly, he's now 14 years old, I only told my friends and family, my very close friends and family, so I fear that some of the stats that we see are only the tip of the iceberg because many are not shared. So behind all of these signatures are stories of women who feel they were not listened to, stories of traumatic births, and in some cases stories of long-term psychological impact. And testimonies in my inbox. One of my constituents, Lisa, a paediatric nurse with nearly 2 decades of experience in the NHS, wrote to me after developing PTSD following a traumatic birth. She spoke not only as a mother, but as a healthcare professional, someone who understands the system from the inside and yet still feels let down by it. Another constituent, Rosie, who has worked for over 20 years supporting women through pregnancy and childbirth, described to me a system where too many women feel that they must fight to have their voices heard, where decisions are not always fully respected, and where trauma is becoming far too common. These, sadly, are not isolated accounts. They are consistent with what we see in the national data and across the many reviews that have been conducted. 1 in 3 women now describe their childbirth experiences as traumatic. PTSD affects around 1 in 20 mothers. Maternal mortality has risen over the past 15 years, and the CQC has found that a majority of maternity units require improvement or are rated inadequate for safety. And we should be clear that the problem is not a lack of understanding of what is going wrong. Over 700 recommendations have been made across more than a dozen reviews into maternity services. They point again and again to the same issues of training time, poor communication, failures to listen to women, and systems that do not learn effectively. All the while, workforce pressures are intensifying. At the end of 2025, the Nursing and Midwifery Council found that growth in the Nursing and Midwifery Register had slowed sharply, driven by a nearly 50% drop in international recruitment. This risks further strain on maternity services that are already struggling with staffing and retention. And further behind these headlines on staffing numbers, there is a quieter crisis in the day-to-day reality of the job. A constituent of mine who works as a midwife told me that her colleagues are working 12-hour shifts without proper breaks, often not stopping until 5 p.m. in the afternoon after starting at 7:15 in the morning. They are expected to juggle the workload of 2 people, stay beyond their hours, and move between demanding day and night shifts with little flexibility. At the same time, they are navigating constantly changing guidance, a heavy administrative burden, and a culture where too often the fear is that if something goes wrong, the blame will fall on them. This is a toxic combination of pressure, exhaustion, and anxiety, which is totally unsustainable, and it is driving people out of the profession. And so the question before us today is not whether there is a problem, it is whether we are prepared to act on and what we already know. And that is why I support the call for a Maternity Commissioner who would provide national leadership, accountability and, crucially, oversight of the implementation of those many outstanding recommendations. Because without clear ownership, it is all too easy for reports to be published, welcomed and then quietly set aside. Many of the constituents who have written to me are healthcare professionals themselves. They speak of a system under intense pressure, of understaffing, burnout, and not having the time or resources to deliver the level of care they know that patients deserve. So if we want to support these staff, we must fix the system in which they're working, and that is why the Liberal Democrats have set out a maternity rescue package to make Britain the safest place in the world to have a baby, which includes appointing a maternity commissioner, as well as ensuring 24/7 consultants' presence on maternity units, providing one-to-one midwifery care during labour, investing in the workforce, including hundreds more midwives, restoring funding for vital services and guaranteeing access to perinatal mental health support. And it also means addressing the unacceptable disparities that persist in maternal outcomes, where black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during pregnancy or shortly after birth than white women. And it means ensuring that when things do go wrong, families are treated with compassion, transparency and proper support. And while the AMOS review is important and should be welcomed, it is also the 14th major review into maternity services. We need delivery. The families in my constituents who signed this petition are asking not for more reports, but for change. They are asking for a system where they feel safe, listened to and cared for at one of the most important moments of their lives. No birth is easy. It is a major, demanding, intense and very painful process, but in 2026, in the 5th largest economy in the world, it shouldn't be dangerous and it should be equitable.
Michelle Welsh.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And just for complete openness and transparency, I am a harmed mother. I have been involved in the Nottingham inquiry. I do sit on the National Maternity Task Force and I'm the chair of the Maternity APPG. I just want to be really clear about that. I want to place on record my personal and sincere thanks to Louise Thompson and Thea Walcott. After the most traumatic, horrific birth trauma, they have chosen to speak out, not just for themselves, in fact, not for themselves at all, but for countless other women. That courage truly matters, because for every voice we hear, there are more still unheard. And courage after trauma should not be a necessity for change, and that is why this debate today is so important. And I do not want to preempt the findings of the Baroness Amos review. I certainly welcome the National Task Force and the work the government is doing, the first of its kind in a government, I hasten to ask. But I will say this plainly: maternity services are systematically failing too many women and too many babies. And we cannot ignore what is happening across the country, where families raise concerns for years and years and years and years, and those concerns were not acted upon soon enough. This is not one hospital, this is not one failure, this is a pattern of women not being listened to, a pattern of warning signs missed, a pattern of fathers and birthing partners being ignored, a pattern of poor practice continuing unchecked, sometimes for years and years. And yes, we must be honest about this. The system of oversight has failed. Certainly in Nottingham, the Care Quality Commission failed. The Nursing and Midwifery Council failed. The General Medical Council failed. And when the system fails, it's not just frontline care, it is the structures designed to keep people safe. Inequalities are profound and, quite frankly, a disgrace. Black and Asian women are significantly more likely to have complications, poorer outcomes. If there is not equitable and safe care, then we don't have any safe care at all, and this must change. Maternity systems are failing. Let me be clear, this did not just happen overnight. There is also a societal problem. When was it that childbirth and maternity became a second-class health service, where past governments allowed it to become so overstretched and so overfunded? When did we as a society become so apathetical towards birth? Now, I stand here as a Member of Parliament, a proud Member of Parliament for Sherwood Forest, but first and foremost, my path that brought me here was a harmed mother who was dismissed, a mother who was told she didn't understand her own body, a mother still living with the consequences. And through my work, I've spoken to over 1,000 families and hundreds of organisations, different stories, different hospitals, different circumstances, but the same themes again and again and again. Not being listened to, concerns dismissed, opportunities to intervene missed. The message is clear and it is urgent. We need accountability, but not a culture of fear. We need a system where staff can speak up, where families are heard the first time, where learning drives improvement. But we must also confront something deeper. We have to change societal's attitude towards childbirth. Too often women are dismissed, too often pain is minimised, too often women are told this is normal when something is wrong, and the culture seeps into our systems, and when it does, it becomes dangerous. Listening to women is not optional, it is fundamental to safe care, and that is why we need a Maternity Commissioner. But let me be absolutely clear, this cannot be a figurehead role. This must be a role with real authority, real independence and real power to act. Power to access data in real time, power to identify patterns early, power to intervene when warning signs appear, because we cannot continue with a system where tragedies are happen, reviews are written, and then we move on. Rising baby loss, serious incidents, repeated failings, these must trigger action immediately. A maternity commissioner must ensure that poor practice is not allowed to continue unchecked, that you can't hop from trust to trust to trust when you have caused harm, that is followed and that is tracked. Warning signs cannot be ignored, and that families are not left to fight for answers after the harm that has already been done. And Chairman, I have to say, that's one of the most horrific things. That you go through the most horrendous situation possible. I was lucky. I walked out of that hospital with my baby. When my baby was breathing, he wasn't breathing. And I nearly died as well, but I walked out of that hospital. I was told they didn't know whether my son was going to have developmental delays or not when I walked out of the hospital. I was also told that my son was deaf, and that was incorrect as well. It was the most horrendous thing, but I walked out of that hospital with my baby. Thousands and thousands of women don't. And it's about time we started to face that as a reality, not use this as a political football, but the reality that exists. Our maternity services are systematically failing. But alongside this, we also must recognise, across this country, there are profound examples of outstanding care, dedicated midwives, doctors, and healthcare professionals going above and beyond every single day to keep women and babies safe, working under pressure, working short-staffed, still delivering exceptional care, but they cannot do it alone. They need safer staffing, they need time to care, they need leadership and support, they need a system that works, a system that backs them, a system that protects them when they raise concerns, a system that enables them to deliver the care they know is needed. Because this is not about blame. This is about building something better. A system that is accountable without fear. A system driven by data and early intervention. A system that listens to women, to families and to staff. A system that acts when it matters most. Because maternity care should never be a postcode lottery. It should never depend on where you live. And it should never, ever come down to luck. Every woman deserves to be heard. Every baby deserves to be safe. Every family deserves dignity, compassion and answers. So yes, we do need a maternity commissioner, but we need more than that as well. We need a system and a society that finally listens to women, finally acts and finally puts safety where it belongs, at the heart of every birth. Thank you.
Amy Stone.
Thank you, Sir. It's a real pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. What I want to share with everyone today is, I think, a cautionary tale. And I want to just set the geography for you. I have the biggest constituency in the UK. It stretches from John O'Groats way, way down to just north of Inverness. Think about this huge area of Scotland. And what I'm about to say in no way reflects on the midwives that we have in Caithness and other parts of my constituency. But it's like this. Some years ago, the Scottish Government, in its infinite wisdom, decided to downgrade a consultant-led maternity service based in Wick. Wick is up the top of the UK near John O'Groats. And that was downgraded to a midwife-led service. This meant that mothers would have to travel over 100 miles in each direction to Inverness to give birth. Now, travelling from Caithness to Inverness on a sunny day is one thing. Travelling in winter is a very, very different proposition. The A9 blocks in many winters and you can't get through. So what happens if a pregnant mother is in an ambulance on her way to give birth in Inverness and they can't get through? So they then get hold of the emergency helicopter. But what if you've got a road traffic accident in another part of the Highlands, say in Loch Harbour or in Skye or in Morayshire, and the number of choppers have gone in different directions? Then what? I've posed this again and again to the Scottish Government and said you could have a tragedy on your hands. I asked for a safety audit again and again, and there's been no safety audit whatsoever of this. What about winter? What about when the chopper doesn't fly, can't fly? What about when the ambulance can't get through? Now, back in 2018, one mother, a mother of twins, was on her way down an ambulance, and she gave birth to the first baby in Golspie, about 50 miles through a 100-mile journey. A second ambulance had to be called, and she was driven on to Inverness to give birth to the second child. Can you imagine how traumatic and awful that was for the mother? Both children and the mother survived, thank God. And at the time, I remember it well, somebody called Nicola Sturgeon said, "Oh, this is very serious, we'll look into this." But nothing happened. Now, the statistics speak for themselves today. In the most recent period we looked at, 6 babies were born in Wick General Hospital, Caithness General Hospital in Wick, and 166 were born in Raigmore. Think about in Inverness. Think about all those return journeys. Think about your mum coming to see her daughter and little baby. Think about where do they stay? It's expensive. We had a superb local service and we don't have it any longer. And that I find fundamentally, simply dreadful. Now, I conclude with this. Eventually, in the Scottish Parliament, tail end of last year, there was a motion to hold an independent inquiry into maternity services in the north of Scotland. And it went through. And the local population said, hallelujah, at long last it's going to be addressed. But then what happened? Again, in their infinite wisdom, the Scottish Government said, actually, despite the fact there was a majority decision in the Scottish Parliament, we're not going to do an independent inquiry, we'll have a little independent, an in-house look at what's happening here. And that's where we are today. Can you imagine what message that sends out to mums and to families in the north of Scotland? And I have gone on about this, Alec, as I'm sure you know yourself, again and again and again in this place, and yet it's devolved. We are completely powerless to do anything. So I hope that all the sentiments being expressed today about a commissioner, I hope it comes to be reality, and I hope that the Scottish Government is told to look very closely at it indeed, and I hope they're shamed, as simple as that, shamed into doing something and sorting out a truly shocking situation, and one that is in fact extremely dangerous, and it's a miracle that neither a child's life or a mother's life hasn't been lost yet. I'm sorry if I don't mince my words, but I feel very strongly about it indeed. Thank you, Sir Alec.
Lizzie Collins.
Thank you, Sir Alec. It's a pleasure to serve you today under your chairship. And I want to thank my honourable friend, the member for Folkestone, for introducing this important debate. Now, over the course of this speech, at least 4 babies will be born in England, and it's hard to fathom in that time, imagining these 4 babies coming out into the world, tiny hands stretching out, a whole future beginning for them with their first breath. Now, like most parents, the birth of my children was one of the most significant moments of my life. But alongside that joy comes something else that I think every birthing parent will recognise, and that is just how vulnerable you are in that situation and how frightening childbirth can be. You're placing your life and your baby's life in the hands of others, in the hands of chance, and in the hands of the brutal reality of natural processes. I first became involved in maternity advocacy after the frankly quite awful birth of my first child in 2014, and it was only when that happened that I realised how much harm had been done to someone close to me when she gave birth in 2011, and really how bad it was. And I actually remember apologising to her with this newborn in my arms going, I'm so sorry, I had no idea how bad it is. And this has happened to women up and down the country. Now today, Sir Alec, I represent Morecambe Bay, where both of those births took place, and Morecambe Bay is also where baby Ida Locke was born and died in 2019. And Ida and her parents are always on my mind when we talk about issues such as this. I do feel obliged to say first, though, that the vast majority of maternity care is safe. We talk about all the failings and all the horrors that women have seen, but I don't want that to frighten families now, and we have to accept that the worst tragedies are exceptions. But it's the experience of parents and that avoidable harm that they've seen to them and to their babies that is the reason we're here today debating the pros and cons of a maternity commissioner. And I'll be honest, I don't have necessarily fixed views on this, and it's been really interesting to hear colleagues speak today, and I look forward to hearing more. Also, obviously, I'm very interested in what the outcome will be from Baroness Amos's investigation. But what I can say now, though, is we can't just keep on trying to learn lessons. We actually need to take action right now. We've had review after review, we've had inquiry after inquiry, and yet here we are. I'll happily give way.
Chris Brownfull.
The honourable member is making a powerful speech, and she's absolutely right to highlight we had the Bill Kirkup review, which came out with multiple recommendations, and cross-party, the House was saying, now we need to implement those recommendations. It never happened. Then we had the Donna Rockenden review that had the IEAs, the immediate and essential actions. We need to implement those. The government hasn't come forward and said that they will make those mandatory, and now we've got Baroness Amos's review. Does she agree with me? This has to be the last review for the sake of every single mother that's come and every single mother that is to come, to make sure that they know that they're being well supported when they go into those hospital settings.
Mr. Collins.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and I absolutely agree. And actually, I think there's some work to do to prioritise the actions that have come out of all those inquiries, because if you try to do too much, you'll do it all badly. And I think there has to be a real focus on what is it that will make the difference to safety and to the experience of women. Now, these countless national and local maternity reports have revealed persistent issues with care, failure to listen to expectant mothers, staffing pressures, a lack of transparency, and institutional cultures that have encouraged cover-up. This is against the background of increased medical complexity in pregnancy and birth, wider aspects of public health having worsened, and frankly the racism and misogyny that we still see permeating our society. And these failures are a long time in the making. Failed regulation contributed to the historic problems in Morecambe Bay, and that was under a Labour government. Under successive Conservative governments, we saw structural changes to our care systems and wider society that have impacted care. Austerity saw a £37 billion capital investment shortfall in the 2010s compared to our peer countries. And we know that increased poverty affects maternal and neonatal mortality. And as a nation, we have become more poorly over the last 15 years. But it's now on us, Sir Alec, and on the government to fix this. And as a member of the Patient Safety All-Party Parliamentary Group, as well as through my own work as a constituency MP, I have seen that tragedies are often partly or completely avoidable, whether through effective diagnostics, timely or better treatment, or simply listening to women when they say that something is wrong. The consequences of these failures are devastating. There's been a study from the Royal College of Gynaecologists and Obstetricians that showed that up to 75% of preterm babies who died could have potentially been saved with different care. And even when the worst is avoided, bad experiences can leave lasting damage. They can erode trust in services and make families more anxious about seeking care in the future. And I want to touch on a couple of aspects that I don't think have had the concerted operational effort put into them that they ought to have. The first is the conditions midwifery and obstetric staff work in, including the wider picture of the health of the nation. My view is that most midwives, doctors and support staff are doing their absolute best in challenging circumstances. I do believe that most people go into maternity care because they want to deliver babies safely into this world and support families, and that they often go above and beyond. But they're being stretched too thin by the demands of the job. They're looking after ever more complex cases on every shift. And in 2023 alone, midwives and support workers put in over 100,000 hours of overtime. Yeah. Even hospitals that are rated highly for maternity care feel the strain, with staffing gaps leading to interrupted handovers, missed checks and limited time for training. And over that time, that pressure leads to burnout, staff leaving, and loss of experience that the system depends on. And when the system is stretched like that, it's staff and patients who feel the consequences. So I hope that the Minister will ensure that whilst we drive down waiting lists in elective care, we support maternity staff, improve their work environment, and not lose sight of the wider improvements to public health that we need to make to reduce that complexity and comorbidities. The second thing I want to talk about, Sir Alec, is culture, particularly the ability of staff to speak up, and for brave and open leadership, and for lessons truly to be learnt. I'm not saying this is easy to do. It's quite tricky, and it takes concerted and skillful leadership. But I would say that culture simply means the way we do things around here. It can be tangible. Culture can be a tangible thing that we can affect. And unfortunately, the long-term failures and the spotlight that comes with them can cause staff to feel under attack, defensive, unsupported, even where they've not been part of any particular case. staff groups can entrench, and actually in Morecambe Bay, and since we have found that people working in entrenched staff groups, working in opposition to each other, has caused huge amounts of harm. And poor leadership, of course, compounds all these effects. I've spoken many times about the harm caused by cultures of silence, where staff don't feel able to come forward to raise concerns, where problems are not addressed head-on, and where families are left without proper answers when things go wrong. We need to create environments where people are able to speak up, to raise concerns early and be open when mistakes happen. Because if staff don't feel safe to tell the truth, if they fear being blamed or they fear being punished, then problems are hidden instead of fixed. But more than that, staff need to be supported well when they do raise a concern or even when they cause harm themselves. Because staff don't listen to what the leadership say, they see what they do. They look at their actions and they will behave accordingly. And just to be clear, human beings will make mistakes. Patients will be harmed by those mistakes. This is inevitable, and not all cases of harm can be prevented, but it can always be learnt from. And in any organisation, culture is set from the top. Leadership has to show through actions that concerns are taken seriously and that no one will be penalised for speaking honestly. And what shocked me, Sir Alec, working as a maternity advocate is organisations that are meant to be care organisations whose response to a bereaved family is not to reach out and care for them and hold them, but is instead to keep them at arm's length, to lie to them, to not tell the truth, and then even when it comes to coroner's inquests, be adversarial. It really beggars belief. And linked to this actually is that families often feel the need to take legal action simply to get answers. This costs huge amounts of money. It still sometimes doesn't get them their answers, and it sets up that adversarial approach which can cause further harm to families. Now, I hope that the Public Office Accountability Bill, which is also known as the Hillsborough Law, will shift that legal risk for organisations. The current legal risk to many hospital trusts appears to be telling the truth. That seems to be how they are seeing it. And I hope this new law will shift that legal risk so that it's far riskier to obfuscate than it is to be candid. And Sir Alec, there are so many different aspects of maternity safety that I could talk here all day. The way quote-unquote normal birth culture still permeates the education of our midwives, and some practice, despite the fact it is shown to be harmful. The wider culture around birth that seems to be saying it must be a joyful, wonderful experience at all times, when actually in reality it's messy and it's brutal, and quite often it's unpleasant, even when it all goes well. We should be learning from other countries as well, Sir Alec. For example, in Japan, they have no-fault compensation for profound cerebral palsy. This separates the process of giving compensation from the process of investigating what happened, what went wrong. It appears to have lowered the legal costs associated with maternity care, but more importantly, it also seems to have reduced the number of babies who are born with profound cerebral palsy. So we all know that maternity care needs to be improved in this country, whether that's through the appointment of a Maternity Commissioner or other actions such as implementation of the recommendations that we laid out in the Amos review. I want to thank my colleagues for their contributions and also for their constituents for bringing their stories to them. For making maternity care safe, we need to make sure that services are properly staffed, create the conditions for safe care, where handovers can be done properly, where staff have time to do their jobs well, and where they're supported to rest and recover. Also means making sure women are listened to, concerns are taken seriously, and then when things do go wrong, it's handled with honesty and care. It means accountability for leaders as well as frontline staff. And I finally would urge the Minister to consider whether the leadership of a Maternity Commissioner can finally give us the change that our constituents deserve. Thank you, Sir Alec.
Stevia.
Thank you, Sir Alec. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'm pleased that we're having this very important debate today, following on from the parliamentary E-petition, which secured more than 100 signatures from my constituents in Mansfield. Indeed, after meeting with the Nottingham Maternity Affected Families Group on a number of occasions, since becoming the Member of Parliament for Mansfield, I've become acutely aware of how important these issues are to families in Nottinghamshire and in my constituency. And today, I argue that the consideration of a maternity commissioner, important though it is, really has to be accompanied by something which is more fundamental than that. Donna Ockenden's work, both in Nottinghamshire and in other parts of the country, has exposed patterns that we cannot ignore. Families not listened to, concerns frequently dismissed, and failures repeated over many years. But what has been most troubling for me is not only what went wrong in one place, in Nottinghamshire, but how familiar those failings are across multiple trusts. And we've seen similar issues emerge in different parts of the country, at different times and under different leadership. That points, in my opinion, not simply to isolated breakdowns, but to systemic weaknesses that demand a national response. And I believe that a maternity commissioner could play a vital role in ensuring accountability going forward, ensuring that recommendations are implemented, giving families a voice and providing that leadership to drive improvement. But I think a commissioner alone cannot answer those deeper questions. How did this happen repeatedly in various hospitals right across the UK for decades? And I think that that is a really very, very deep set of questions of multiple failures. And that's why I believe a full national and public inquiry is necessary, more than a task force, although I believe that that is very welcome, but an inquiry that can compel evidence to hear directly from families and staff, and to examine culture as well as clinical practice. I think that that would bring together the experiences of those affected, not in fragments, but as to a whole, because I think when I look at this, too often learning has been localised and therefore somewhat limited. A number of members have already commented that reports are written, lessons are identified, but the wider system nationally fails to absorb that. And I think the creation of a maternity commissioner and the establishment of a full and proper national inquiry and acting on the outcomes of past and ongoing inquiries are not alternatives. They can be and could be complementary. One to drive change in the future, and one to fully understand and properly understand those failures that have occurred in the past over many, many years. And I think we owe it to the families. I think we owe it to the families in Nottinghamshire, right around the country, to my constituents who have suffered absolutely life-changing harm and in many cases death of children and mothers. I think we owe it to them, and we owe it to those who rely on these services today and in the future to do both and all of those things. And I therefore welcome the debate that we're having today, and I hope the government will take note of the points that are made in the chamber today.
Bill Ribiradi.
Thank you, Sir Alec, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I want to start by thanking my honourable friend, the member for Folkestone and Hythe, for expertly introducing this debate, and also the petitioners, Louise Thompson and Theo Clark, who I was pleased to work with on the birth trauma inquiry for their continued work on these issues. Now, as many members will know, maternity care is an issue that is of great importance to me. And I know it's of great importance to my constituents, as demonstrated by the hundreds that signed the petition. I wholeheartedly support the call for a Maternity Commissioner, and as the chair of the APPG for Black Maternal Health, I'm sure that will surprise no one. This week is Black Maternal Health Awareness Week in the UK, so I want to speak about the continuing racial disparities in maternity care and why a commissioner would work to address this. Now, each Black Maternal Health Awareness Week, I usually start by addressing the statistics around Black maternal health, and they make for grim listening. When 5 times more the Secretariat of the APPG first founded, Black women were 5 times more likely to die in pregnancy and childbirth than white women. But now the most recent Embrace report shows that Black women are 3 times more likely to die in pregnancy and childbirth. Now, whilst a lot of awareness has made an impact, unfortunately, this is not because necessarily less Black women are dying, but because more of all women are experiencing this horrible situation. And Black women are still twice as likely to experience stillbirth and baby death. And whilst these disparities remain unacceptable, I do want to recognise the work that is being done by NHS Trust to identify some of the shortcomings and address racial bias. But as members know, it's not just the death rate where racial disparities exist. Last year, 5 times more conducted their second Black Maternity Experiences report, a large-scale survey collecting the experiences of Black women during their pregnancy and childbirth. And of the 1,000 respondents, 54% experienced challenges with healthcare professionals, 28% of women reported discrimination, mostly racial, 49% stated that their experience during labour and birth were not properly addressed. And I can't stress enough how deeply concerning it is that women are going through this intensely vulnerable experience when they raise concerns and they are being dismissed and ignored. 23% of Black women did not receive the pain relief they requested, and just 1 in 5 women had been informed of how to make a complaint, with only 8% going on to pursue a formal process. The report has many more harrowing findings, and I would encourage members to read it. I do recognise that action is being taken to address the crisis overall in our maternity care, and I welcome the government's national maternity and neonatal investigation led by Baroness Amos, which I was pleased to feed into with the APPG for Black Maternal Health. This is a much-needed investigation that I hope will provide some much-needed understanding as to why our maternity services are failing so many mothers and babies, as well as clear recommendations to improve the state of maternity care. But as you've already heard many times today, it cannot just be another report where we wring our hands and recommendations are produced that are simply ignored. In 2026 in this country, we cannot keep reeling off these statistics in debates like these. It makes no sense that a country like ours should be experiencing these issues, and so many women and their babies should be dying. Now, I wonder if the Minister will be able to inform us quite specifically about something which appeared in our Labour Party manifesto, and whether a clear target to end the racial disparities in maternity care is expected to be included in the recommendations coming from the forthcoming report. Was the investigation tasked with offering advice on an attainable target, or will the government be developing a target based on the report's findings and recommendations? During last year's Black Maternal Health Week debate, the responding minister insisted that the government were working towards setting an evidence-based target, but they were not forthcoming about when one would be announced, and I hope the minister will give some indication as to that. Now, the call for a Maternity Commissioner is about accountability. A dedicated Maternity Commissioner would, for the first time, create a single accountable authority with the mandate, resource and institutional weight to confront the systemic failures driving the Black maternal health crisis. They would have right now we're seeing a situation where the responsibility is completely diffuse, and I think a commissioner would change that. They could drive the implementation of the recommendations that have been sitting in reports for years and years. They could ensure that trusts are actually training staff to recognise and challenge racial bias in clinical settings. And they would have a mandate to bring together disaggregated data collection so that these disparities can't be buried in averages. This, as I said, is about accountability and setting clear direction and focus. And what I've realised over the years in terms of challenging these issues, particularly in terms of black maternal health, is that without a dedicated focus, black maternal health remains everyone's concern and nobody's priority. And I've often said that addressing the racial disparities in maternity care will improve the state of maternity care for all women and babies, and establishing a maternity commissioner makes this someone's job, not just to monitor the problem, but to actually put in work to fix it. We cannot continue failing women in this way. It absolutely has to be somebody's sole responsibility to fix this. Thank you.
Honourable.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve with you and the Chair, Sir Alec. And I would like to thank the Honourable Member for Folkestone High for bringing this debate forward, and to everyone in Altrincham and Sale West who signed the petition behind this debate. And I'm especially grateful to those people who wrote to me to bravely share their often harrowing stories of maternity care failures. Their stories were worryingly similar. Avoidable trauma, avoidable complications, and in many cases, avoidable tragedy. That is the reality of our maternity services, and it is not good enough. There was a common theme behind each of the failings my constituents suffered, and that is women not being listened to, their pain not being treated as urgent, and their worries being dismissed. And because of this, they went without the compassion, care and understanding they deserved. I know that nobody wants better for women and babies than the thousands of NHS midwives and maternity staff who work so hard to ensure that the vast majority of births are safe. But it is clear that the system is not working for too many mums, dads and babies. The experience of my constituent Lauren illustrates this. Lauren gave birth in January at Wythenshawe Hospital. Her experience was a litany of failures, and in her own words, for all the hard work of NHS staff, she often felt like an afterthought during her own childbirth. The failings started when Lauren discovered her baby was in breech position at 28 weeks. This was not followed up on. When seeing a midwife before the birth, they seemed too busy to check their notes and thought the baby was head down. And it wasn't until Lauren was a good way through labour that her medical team were aware that the baby was breech. And by that point, it had become an emergency. Lauren, who was in incredible pain, was suddenly surrounded by frantic doctors and midwives asking her questions she was in no real state to answer, and she was told she had 10 minutes to make a decision on the birth of her baby. She had an emergency C-section, which was supposed to happen within 30 minutes, but took 2 hours, and throughout that time, she was without pain relief as overworked midwives desperately tried to care for others. I can't begin to imagine what her experience was like. The pain, the panic, and the unanswered questions leading into one of the biggest procedures a person can have. And thankfully, Lauren's baby was born safely, but it was a birth that didn't need to be such a traumatic emergency. And then unfortunately, Lauren's care only got worse after the baby was born. Dumped into a C-section ward, her partner forced to leave, meaning she was alone for hours at a time without any pain relief, barely able to move, unable to stand up and unable to respond to the crying of her baby. At a time of maximum vulnerability, she had minimal care. Doctors spoke about her, but they never spoke to her. No explanations, no support, and frankly, no one listening, an ordeal which completely understandably has put Lauren and her partner off ever having another baby. Lauren's experience speaks to so many of the problems we have heard today. A system that isn't putting mothers first, that is riven with inequalities and inconsistencies in care, and for all the government's much welcome funding, a system in which staff are overstretched. And as someone who works closely with the campaigning group Dad Shift, I would also point out how Lauren's ordeal highlights the way dads are often failed by maternity services, with their ability to support their partner undermined as a result. This is particularly true, as it was with Lauren, when mothers have had traumatic births and their partners are still sent home, leaving them without emotional and practical support when they are at their most vulnerable. And I hope that the Minister and the government are looking at this as part of the government's much needed work to turn around our maternity services. And I know this work is making progress, not just through the investigation of Baroness Amos, as we've heard from others, as well as the National Maternity and Neonatal Task Force, but also through greater funding, support and accountability for underperforming maternity units. One of these units is at Wythenshawe Hospital, which serves my constituents, and I will forever be grateful for the care my partner Catherine and I received at Wythenshawe, where my 2 sons were born. But I know that for too many of my constituents, this is not their experience. Of course, on that point, I'm happy to give way.
Who do your names?
I'm extremely grateful to the gentleman who is doing right by his constituent, if I may say, and I'm sure they will appreciate the account that he's giving. Would you agree with me that some of the issues with maternity departments are sometimes much more mundane? For example, in Taunton, Musgrove Park Hospital, there is water coming in the ceilings, there is 30-degree heat in the summer. And given the Secretary of State said, if we can bring forward these timetables when he was speaking about Musgrove Park Hospital, we will do so. Mustn't the government do everything they can to hasten their hospitals programme so that maternity services and the conditions in which mums give birth and which staff work can be improved as quickly as possible?
Around.
I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman that the environment and conditions within which maternity units are set is clearly of huge importance to mothers, their partners and babies and the whole system of maternity care. This government, of course, has made significant capital investment into the NHS estate, having inherited a hospitals building programme that had no funding and no clear timetable for building. I'm sure the Minister is giving his request due consideration. And on Wythenshawe Hospital, I'm pleased that the government won't tolerate a poor standard of care for my constituents, and I'm immensely grateful for the £40 million in funding the hospital is set to receive to tackle the issues in its maternity care that was recently announced. But the problems, both at Wythenshawe and across the country, go beyond funding. We are talking about systematic failings that have harmed women and their babies for an extended period. As others have said, in that time we've had countless scandals, reports and recommendations, but no progress. And my constituents believe that a Maternity Services Commissioner could contribute to the change we need, and I hope the government will give it due consideration. Thank you.
Myra Ellis.
So Alec, and thanks to the Honourable Member for Folkestone and Hythe for introducing this debate, and a huge thank you to Louise Thompson and Theo Clark and the 150,000 people who signed this petition for keeping maternity services on the agenda. The petition before us is motivated by a very real and deeply painful issue, the loss of trust in maternity services following preventable harm and trauma. I welcome the passion behind this petition, though I fear that maternity care is possibly too complex, too nuanced and too diverse to be well served by a single National Maternity Commissioner, and that focusing our energy there risks allowing the government to tick a box when what would actually make the greatest difference is sustained, courageous investment in maternity services themselves, as many of my colleagues have also highlighted. Much of the current maternity debate, understandably, centres on trauma, risk and dissatisfaction. Those things matter, and I know others today have and will focus on how we reduce that. But when they become the only things we measure, we distort the entire system. So I'll focus my comments today on women themselves, because how women experience birth is not a nice to have. It has profound consequences for mental health, family well-being and long-term outcomes. Around 1 in 4 women experience perinatal mental health problems, costing the UK £8.1 billion annually when left untreated. And that is true no matter what your birth is like. I'd like to put my hand up today and say I'm a bit fed up of people rolling their eyes at the concept of a birth plan, for example. Of course women know it might not happen exactly as they'd hoped. A plan is to be prepared for all eventualities, to express your wishes and to be empowered. Anyone who suggests otherwise is undermining the right of women to feel in control and prepared for this huge change in her life. I've had some beautifully powerful discussions with my colleagues over the past few months on the topic of giving birth. Some who have felt looked down on for having a C-section, some like myself who felt looked down on for wanting a home birth. The fact is that all those choices are completely valid. The problem isn't your birth choice, the problem is anyone judging you for it. And on that point, I want to gently address an elephant in the room. The concept that midwives have followed the pursuit of normal birth at any cost entered public policy following the Morecambe Bay investigation in 2015. It was never intended as a literal description of all midwifery practice, yet it became a powerful and damaging shorthand. The report described a seriously dysfunctional service influenced by a small number of dominant individuals where poor leadership, weak clinical skills and failures in basic risk assessment created a lethal mix. The problem was not support for physiological birth. It was unsafe practice and toxic culture. But over time, that nuance has been lost. Supporting physiological birth became conflated with recklessness. Midwifery philosophy was portrayed as being in opposition to safety, rather than, as professional standards make very clear, working in partnership with it. The result has been a false binary in policy thinking. Safety versus choice, intervention versus physiology, risk management versus women's autonomy. That false binary still shapes decision-making today and contributes to women feeling that birth is something done to them rather than by them. If we continue talking in this way, I fear we are making women's bodies a political football. I believe we and this government are capable of better. I've heard directly from senior clinicians that rising intervention rates are linked to older mothers or decreasing health standards, and yet the data does not back that up. The average age of a birthing mother has risen by less than a year since 2014, and the percentage of women giving birth over 35 went up from 23% to just 25%. That small increase cannot explain a 45% increase in interventions over the same period. We have to move away from anecdotes and ensure we're using the data. If this debate becomes another iteration of that same binary, we risk repeating the very mistakes that brought us here. And so while I welcome the clear passion behind the ask for a maternity commissioner, I would worry it would not capture the nuance and experience of opinion in the birthing space. So Alec, there is so much more I would love to say about how brilliant and resilient midwives are, about how brave every person who experiences and supports someone through childbirth is, even when we're expected to just crack on and deal with it, and how great it is that our new women's health strategy focuses on the importance of women being listened to. But in the interest of time, I will focus finally on what we need from this government. If we are serious about improving outcomes, we already know where to look. Continuity of midwifery care is recommended by both the World Health Organization and NICE and is associated with fewer preterm births, lower rates of loss and significantly higher satisfaction from families. Randomised control trials show these benefits apply to women at both lower and higher risk. Despite a national commitment to roll out a continuity of carer models, progress stalled because there were not enough staff to deliver it safely. In 2022, NHS England formally removed the target date, citing insufficient staffing. Many qualified midwives have left the profession, but evidence suggests that a significant number would return if they were able to provide relationship-based, compassionate care with time to do their jobs properly. So let me conclude by speaking directly to ministers. The question before us is not whether government recognises that maternity services are under strain. That is already well established. The question is whether ministers are prepared to act at the scale required. A maternity commissioner may feel tangible, it may feel responsive, but it does not avoid the hard truth. Women's experiences will not change without investment, workforce stability and systematic redesign. As other colleagues have said, there are over 700 recommendations on maternity safety already in existence. But if the government is serious about restoring confidence in maternity services, then I would ask ministers, firstly, will they publish a fully funded workforce plan for maternity, including midwifery, retention and return to practice? Will they commit to resourcing continuity of carer models rather than quietly shelving them when staffing pressures bite? And will they address the 27 billion maternity negligence bill, not through litigation management, but through prevention? This government must decide whether it wants to preside over a system that simply manages failure or whether it is willing to take the brave step of long-term investment to make the UK a place where women's choices and bodily autonomy are respected. Safety is paramount, joy and empowerment are not incidental but expected, and professionals are supported to deliver humane, relationship-based care. We do not need another review, and I'm not sure we really need another title. We need staff, time, continuity, trust and investment, and if we get that right, outcomes will improve, costs will fall, trust will return, and maternity care in this country can once again be something we are all proud of. Thank you.
Serve under your chairmanship, and I also thank the member for Folkestone and Hythe for leading this debate, and crucially I pay tribute to both Louise Thompson and Thea Clark, for the petitioners, for raising the profile of the issue of birth trauma and helping so many other women to share their own experiences and to fight, crucially, for the changes that will prevent others from having to go through the same trauma. I also want to put on record my thanks to the member for Sherwood Forest, who's done a brilliant job with the APPG on maternity and has explained through her own personal experience today just what that trauma can mean. This debate is fundamentally about how we ensure women are being heard and genuinely heard by the National Health Service. But it's also about how we raise the levels of care so that the best are not an exception and that they're a rule. One of the missions for this government is restoring trust in maternity care. We know that that trust has been eroded by traumatic experiences, by poor standards of care, and more importantly, women feeling like no one is listening to them. The rise in maternal mortality, as has already been said, has seen in 2021 to 2023 embraced data compared to that of 2009 to 2011, a simply unacceptable rise in mortality. Particularly stark is the increased risk for minoritized communities, as has already been said, and those from disadvantaged backgrounds. In 2023, women living in the most deprived areas are dying at almost twice the rate of those in the least deprived areas. Seen alongside this data is an increase in obstetric hemorrhage, something I know worries mums-to-be and health professionals alike. Women who want a second child need to know the well-documented risks of severe bleeding and placenta previa caused by previous C-sections. The NHS is not good enough also at monitoring not just maternal deaths, but also morbidity and monitoring those trends. So although it's very good at spotting when there's a trend in stillbirth or in maternal death, it's not so good at spotting trends in PPH and admissions to ITU, and they both need the same attention. The government has a responsibility to ensure that whatever choice women make, they're informed choices and that the procedures are safe. If they want a home birth, let's make that a real choice. If they want a C-section, let's make that a real choice. And if they want a midwife-led unit, if they want an obstetrician to care for them, let's make that a real choice. And I agree with my friend for the Ribble Valley, who's absolutely spot on. We should move away from making this a binary choice between safety and choice. It's time for us to be proactive and not reactive, and to put into place the processes that will protect future mums from negative experiences of maternity care. That's why I'm glad the National Maternity and Neonatal Task Force, announced by the government last year, is focused on long-term systemic reform, and that actually addresses the systematic failures identified by the CQC. The conversation must include midwives who also want best practice and care for all the mums they work with more than anyone else. It must ensure oversight and accountability and robust reporting mechanisms that supports midwives as well as mums. The word midwife, not many people will know, is Middle English. It literally means with woman. And that's the crucial point. Midwives across the UK are advocating for women, supporting women and sharing their expertise with women all the time. But that's also why we need to make continuity of care a reality for women, so that you can be with women throughout the pregnancy and the birth. And with the investment in staffing needed to allow rotas to cope for that gold standard that everyone wants, both for pregnant women and for midwives. I was proud to host a drop-in for the RCM with a colleague for the member for Bishop Auckland earlier this year. And I want to put on record that my wife is a midwife. In fact, she's one of the main reasons that I'm standing in this building today. I came into politics to change the situation for women who are suffering, but also to help to get more midwives into the profession. It's not been explicitly said, but let's be honest, the last government failed to invest in the NHS and it failed to invest in the right number of midwives. My wife came home night after night saying, we simply are understaffed, we're chronically understaffed. She was really worried about the standards of care that would there be provided and whether it was safe or not. I said, instead of writing about maternity crisis, I want to do something about the maternity crisis. So that's why I became an MP, to invest real hard money into the NHS and into staffing, but also into making sure that we change the procedures and reform the system. It's really worth saying that actually it's not just about staffing as well. It's about the right culture, it's the right leadership, it's about whether obstetricians and midwives talk to each other, whether they're on the same side, and crucially about whether women are listened to throughout the process. There's been far too much avoidable trauma for far too many women, as several inquiries have found. For my own constituents in Rochdale, the Royal Oldham Hospital maternity services are often of high quality. I've met senior midwives who are trying to provide innovative solutions to the challenges they face. But let's be honest, there are too many times when women are let down at the Royal Oldham. The CQC survey of patient experience, published in December 25, found some unacceptably poor levels of care. On labour and birth, the hospital scored much worse than expected than other trusts. On staff caring for you, much worse than expected compared to other trusts. On care in hospital after birth, much worse than expected compared to other trusts. And on that last measure, they had an appalling score. This is on care in hospital after birth, an appalling score of 5.4 out of 10. Now, it's clear that this debate today, there's been a huge amount of work undertaken to deliver what we all want. Maternity services that are well-informed, personalised and safe for all women, regardless of race or background. We owe it to every family to provide maternity services where mums are given a full range of informed choice, backed by the medical evidence, and where they're listened to, genuinely listened to, and where compassionate healthcare is at the heart of every single birth. There is excellent care in the NHS. We should say that again and again, but we need to make sure that every area, every trust, every woman gets the high quality of care that they truly deserve.
Dr. Becky Cooper.
Thank you, Miss Jardine. Not Sir Alec anymore, Miss Jardine. A pleasure to serve under your chairship today. I've noted. Thank you. So I wanted to speak in this debate as a member of the Health and Social Care Select Committee and also as a Member of Parliament for Worthing West. At a local level, University Hospitals Sussex have implemented huge improvements of late, following the alarm being raised about the safety of our maternity services after a number of heartbreaking, avoidable baby deaths came to light. And for the families affected, life will never be the same again, and there will now be a review led by Donna Ockenden to make sure that the truth of those times is fully heard and understood, and that the indescribable experience of those families is documented to best effect and lessons embedded in future practice. This review will also contribute to the improvements that are already making a difference in the maternity services in University Hospital Sussex, including in my own hospital in Worthing. In a recent CQC inspection, the maternity services have now been rated as good. And this reflects the maternity survey, where 98% of women said that they felt they had been treated with dignity and respect during labour and birth, and a similar 95% felt involved enough in decisions about their care. We have heard from so many of our colleagues this afternoon about so many times when this has not happened, so I take great hope that this survey is so positive. Improvements in these maternity services have included 24/7 birth supporters, working with experts by experience to create a restorative culture,
bespoke antenatal pathways for asylum seekers and refugees, and specialist midwifery support for traveller communities. There is strengthened staffing capacity with 40 additional qualified midwives recruited across the Trust maternity units. Maternity units are now fully staffed, compared with a vacancy rate of 15% at the time of the previous inspection. And what a difference that has made. And this level of service improvement and delivery needs to be a requisite for all maternity services in this country. And the soon-to-be-published AMOS review recommendations, of which we have heard about this afternoon, will undoubtedly provide a clear blueprint for the National Maternity and Neonatal Task Force to move this forward. But let us be in no doubt, as has been heard, we have had 700 recommendations to date. We probably know what's going to be in the AMOS review, so let this be the last one. Because the tragic fact, in spite of these excellent improvements I've seen in my local area, is that in 2022 to 2024, the overall rate of maternal death in the UK was 20% higher than it was in 2009 to 2011, when the government of the day set an ambition to halve the rate of maternal mortality in England. And although life of a precious baby is priceless, clinical negligence does have a price tag. And the NHS has faced an estimated £27.4 billion bill for maternity negligence in England since 2019. And this figure exceeds the total maternity budget for the same period and reflects a devastating toll of preventable deaths and life-altering injuries to mothers and babies. There has been a significant investment in increasing the number of midwives over the past 18 months under this Labour government. And since December 2024, an extra 800 midwives have been recruited. But this is not enough on its own. There needs to be, as we've heard so sensibly from my colleagues, widespread system change and a continuum of care. We have also heard from my honourable friend about the issues around black maternal health, and our very own Health and Social Care Select Committee highlighted this in its inquiry, where we saw that black women in England continue to face disproportionately poor outcomes in maternity care and the highest maternal mortality rates. Babies born to black women are over twice as likely to die in their first year compared with babies born to white women. A fact that in this day and age I find incredible. As somebody who has worked in the NHS as a doctor and is now a public health consultant, it really is entirely unacceptable that continues to be the case. So the task, therefore, is accountability, coordination, and ensuring that evidence-based recommendations drive rapid improvement for women, their babies, and the hard-working staff. The Women's Health Strategy, published last week, recognises that women's birth experiences and outcomes are a fundamental aspect of high-quality healthcare. Maternity services need to be embedded in a model based on relationships and wider care. That is essentially what health services are. Live or die on. If we do not have good relationships and good wider care, our health services will struggle. And how we organise our services needs to change. And I know that this is a core mission for our government, shifting to community-based care in the neighbourhood health model. £200 million has been invested in the Healthy Babies programme to improve perinatal mental health, parent-infant relationships and infant feeding in 75 local authorities, which is part of £900 million that's been allocated to Best Start family hubs. And the Best Start in Life campaign includes information on pregnancy, but we must ensure that maternity healthcare is fully embedded in the shift to neighbourhood care. And be in no doubt, we have talked about moving from hospital to community in the 20 years that I have been in public health and medicine, and we've yet to do it. So I'm under no illusion this is incredibly difficult, but the focus we have this time is welcome. So in summary, considering the improvements that have been made in my own area by University Hospital Sussex and the significant steps that are being taken by the government in establishing the task force led by the Secretary of State, investing in midwives and more broadly women's health and community-based care, I do think that we are seeing positive action starting to take hold. Following the publication of the AMOS review, the Minister may want to consider the possibility of a Maternity Commissioner to carry out the work of the task force, but the primary driver of this decision must be to embed the progress that is being made now and to sustainably embed a safe, holistic, person-centred approach across maternity services that can endure and adapt for many generations to come.
Yeah.
And it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd like to echo the thanks given by the member for Folkestone and Hyde to all the petitioners who've signed today's petition, including 262 of my own constituents in Shipley. My interest in maternity safety goes back to the time over a decade ago when I was Director of Policy at the King's Fund, where we set up an inquiry into the safety of maternity services, which was chaired by Baroness Professor Honora O'Neill. And despite the fact that that work was done over a decade ago, the failures that we hear about today are sadly all too familiar. What struck us at that time was that there had, in the previous decade, been many reports in the preceding years, including confidential inquiries into maternal deaths and confidential inquiries into infant deaths, and that these had not been implemented. So it makes me angry that there's been another decade of more inquiries and reviews where the recommendations have gone unheeded. And that's why I am pleased to be an officer of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Patient Safety and have worked together with my honourable friend from Morecambe and Loonsdale, as well as on the other side, the honourable member for Godalming and Ash, to have as one of our priorities within that APPG, maternity safety. And it's been fantastic to work with colleagues, the member for Sherwood Forest and the member for Rosendale and Darwin, to join up across all party parliamentary groups to share our insights and to also contribute to the AMOS investigation. But, and as part of that, it's very clear that some of the same issues continue from those that we heard about on the King's Fund inquiry a decade ago. Poor teamwork, weak accountability, defensive cultures, and a failure to translate learning into sustained action. And like many other members here, as a constituency MP, I hear a range of stories, mainly around the Bradford Royal Infirmary, and just briefly want to share one of my constituents whose son was stillborn due to complications from the umbilical cord being wrapped around his neck. A late crash call was made after he'd been delivered. And sadly, the baby suffered catastrophic brain injury and was in a minimal conscious vegetative state. That woman with her son was sent home with no diagnosis, and the child has obviously grown up with epilepsy and other problems due to that brain injury. Sadly, in this case, it seems that midwives falsified the ABGAR scores that were on the record and also about the time of the crash call. We've heard about defensive practice. That's why we need a culture that changes. My constituents wrote to me, I have encountered significant barriers in navigating the NHS complaint system, particularly for marginalised communities. Language barriers further complicate the process, often leading to the dismissal of legitimate concerns. I'm pleased to say that Bradford Royal Infirmary has recently received good and outstanding ratings from the Care Quality Commission, respectively, for maternity and neonatal care. And I know they are not complacent about the care that they give, Ms Jardine. Others have mentioned about the system around clinical negligence. As a member of the Public Accounts Committee, we looked at just how this was causing not only a human cost, but a financial cost, as has been talked about. And one of our conclusions was that patients often pursue legal action because the complaint system itself is so confusing and unresponsive, echoing the thoughts of my constituent. It's vital, therefore, that there is timely apologies from clinical staff, and that we put in place effective, compassionate local resolution. That is going to reduce claims, but it's also ethically the right thing to do. And I would be grateful if the Minister is able to just update on the progress of the David Locke Casey review, which we heard a lot about at the Public Accounts Committee. So alongside a better complaint system, we also talked about reform of litigation, potentially considering a no-fault compensation scheme, which would certainly go some way to creating an environment. At the moment, families often experience long legal battles following harm, and that does lead to clinicians and organisations becoming defensive. So I do just want to finish, if I may, Mr. Jardine, with just a very brief example, again, of what happens when people are failed but want to learn and share those learnings with the NHS. My friend Martha's second child died. It was a home birth with complications. She started labour at 2:30 in the morning. At 5:30 a.m. she called the delivery suite. They said, call back in a few hours. When she did that, they sent out a midwife team who didn't reach her until 9:40. A few moments later, her waters broke and she gave birth to her second daughter, but there was meconium in her discharge. As people here who are clinical will know, that is a sign of baby distress. And the midwives called an ambulance immediately. It was another 19 minutes after the 999 call until the ambulance arrived and oxygen was given. And those 12 minutes were crucial, and that length of time without oxygen would have caused global brain damage and severe disability had their daughter survived. Sadly, she died in the care of Great Ormond Street Hospital just a couple of days later. But Ms. Jardine, the point of telling that story is there are many missed opportunities to provide safer care. If the midwives had carried birthing equipment when they were attending, they could have provided immediate care. If the ambulance had prioritised the call from the midwife, that could have prevented the deterioration. I'm sorry, I'm not going to give way respectfully. And if the ambulance had routinely carried a neonatal meconium aspirator, that could have prevented the death of her daughter. My friend says, I was not told who we could complain to following these experiences or when we should do so. And I do hope that whether it's the idea of a maternity commissioner or another systemic way, we need to be learning systemically from women's experiences, and so that these safety recommendations can be implemented. So I do hope, finally, that when we hear from the Amos investigation, that ministers will act swiftly to implement her recommendations and back it up with investment, so that families can have confidence that when tragedies like those of my friend and those of my constituent occur, the system will genuinely learn and improve and take action. Thank you.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Ms Jardine. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and thank you also to the Honourable Member for Folkestone and Hythe for opening this debate with an excellent speech. I declare an interest as a member of the Patient Safety APPG and also the APPGs for baby loss, maternity and birth trauma. Now, campaigners like Theo Clark, Louise Thompson and many more mothers and families over the years have been fighting tirelessly for the improvements that we desperately need to see in our NHS maternity services.
On that point, will the member give way?
I will give way.
Adam
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. After lots of campaigning and hard work by the NHS staff as well, the Yeovil Maternity Unit will reopen tomorrow. The lessons learned from the closure of our unit will be included in the current national review into maternity services. But does my honourable friend agree that the only way recommendations from that review will be properly implemented is with a National Maternity Commissioner and more consultant midwives?
Helen Morgan.
Well, I thank you for his intervention. It was quick off the mark. Yes, I do agree with him that it will be useful to have a maternity commissioner to share those experiences and make sure that other people learn from them. Now, the campaigners, Theo and Louise, as I've mentioned, have shared their own heartbreaking experiences, and I commend their work on securing this important debate. Liberal Democrats wish to be their allies. As a previous co-chair of the Baby Loss APPG, I'm all too familiar with the acute need for better standards of care for mothers across the country. I was also a member of the Birth Trauma APPG when it was headed so ably by Theo Clark, where the need for a maternity commissioner was first discussed and recommended. I'm delighted to see the traction that this proposal has had, thanks to the campaigning of Theo, Louise and many others. Now, last month, the Lib Dems launched our maternity rescue package, which would guarantee high-quality care wherever you live and make Britain the safest country in the world to have a baby. I will give way.
Ellen Maguire.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. I have a constituent who had a history of rapid births, and she wanted the safety net of support of a home birth team alongside the community team, as recommended, but she was unable to have both teams involved. Does my honourable friend agree with me that it's difficult to have confidence in a safe birth if the right medical support simply isn't there?
Well, I thank her for her intervention, and I think she makes a good point because patient voice and listening to women and understanding their wishes and also the risks that their wishes might represent and how to manage them best is such a critical part of safe maternity care. Now, in drawing up our rescue package, I've drawn up from my experience on the birth, trauma, maternity and baby loss all-party groups, and there is so much common ground with the cause of the petitioners, we hope they are buoyed by the fact that someone in Westminster is listening. With our package, a National Maternity Commissioner would oversee improved standards of care nationally, while a Director of Midwifery would be appointed in every maternity unit, alongside an extra 300 consultant midwives to drive clinical excellence in each unit. Our plans would invest £600 million to tackle these vital staffing requirements, but the NHS could save billions of pounds on maternal clinical negligence claims, which cost over £1.3 billion in 2024 alone. These huge clinical negligence costs have consistently been reflected in the findings of local and national reviews. But most importantly, this package would save babies' lives and spare families the trauma of injury or worse happening to mum and baby at what should be the most joyous time of their life. Liberal Democrats welcomed the recent interim review by Baroness Amos. The findings of the review were devastating, showing that too many mothers are not receiving the level of care they need, with devastating consequences for women, babies and their families. But this is the latest in a string of national and local reviews and inquiries, which have produced over 700 recommendations. And that string of reviews, with their myriad but similar recommendations, illustrates why we need a maternity commissioner. Someone who can bring together the learnings of past failings, along with the best practice from around the country, and oversee a step change in the training and culture that will enable all the health professionals in maternity to work as effective teams and give women the personalised and high-quality care that is needed. Now, people across the country were truly shocked by the findings of Donna Ockenden's review into the Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust, which serves my constituents, which found that the deaths of over 200 babies could have been prevented. I've heard from traumatised and grieving parents over the years, sometimes as their friend, sometimes as their MP, each with their own experience of birth trauma, injury to their baby, or worse. They've told me just how important it is to them that these reports and inquiries spark the vital change that is needed and don't lead only to warm words from politicians, followed by decades of gathering dust on the shelves of the Department for Health. Now, since the Ockenden review, the Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust has accepted and taken steps to implement almost all of the immediate and essential actions that Donna Ockenden recommended. And while that process hasn't been perfect, it has clearly been conducted with appropriate focus. The latest CQC rating for maternity at SATH is good, showing that with the right recommendations and leadership, positive change can happen. The team at SATH should be commended for this achievement, and they demonstrate the value of focusing on the steps needed to get care right. Now, however, as we found out subsequently, unsafe maternity care wasn't unique to Shropshire, or indeed to Morecambe, or East Kent, or any of the other places where we've heard such awful stories. We know that women all over the country are still not receiving the care they need. None of the services that the Care Quality Commission inspected in their national review were rated outstanding, with 65% of maternity units unsafe for women to give birth in. It's a scandal that mothers in this country have to settle for potentially dangerous levels of care at what should be one of the happiest moments in their lives. The introduction of a maternity commissioner isn't a quick fix on its own, but a maternity commissioner would provide the leadership required for serious change to the way women and staff on maternity wards are listened to. That commissioner could look at disparities in maternity care, the poorer outcomes that we see for Black and Asian women and those in deprived communities, and drive the change needed to make having a baby safe no matter what your background is. Other improvements are needed too. Our proposal is to guarantee specialist doctors on every maternity unit 24/7 and one-to-one midwifery care for every woman during labour to respond to the desperate need for safe staffing highlighted in each of the reviews and the inquiries by the all-party groups dealing with maternity care. Previous research found that 73% of maternity units in England don't have a consultant present at night, despite most births taking place outside of working hours. Many negligence claims for poor maternity care are linked to failings in care outside of regular working hours. These proposals would come alongside a new capital investment programme to fix crumbling maternity units in need of urgent repair and deliver new dedicated bereavement suites. We'd start with the 7% of maternity units that are at risk of imminent breakdown and restore the 42% of units in need of major repairs. These crucial steps come alongside many other proposals to improve staff training, invest in bereavement support, neonatal specialists, preconception services, and to eliminate maternal health disparities. Now, it's also really important to say that the vast majority of babies are delivered safely, even when things don't go to plan. But we shouldn't dismiss those instances where it goes wrong, and we should be tireless about making the improvements required. I congratulate the campaigners on the success of this petition so far. I now continue to urge the government to demonstrate that recommendations will be turned into actions and the cries for help from countless mothers and families will be listened to.
Opposition spokesperson Dr Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. I'd like to declare an interest as an NHS consultant paediatrician. I have attended over 1,000 deliveries of babies over my career. More recently, and there have been more likely to be the ones where things have been going wrong and there have been more concerns about the baby, as my role is in relation to looking after the infant. I've also had my own 3 children, like the lady for Esher and Walton described in her speech. I've had a mixed experience with 3 healthy children, but the first one was a normal delivery, the second one a somewhat chaotic emergency caesarean section, and the third one a nice and smooth, peaceful elective caesarean section. So a range of experiences for that. I'd like to congratulate the member for Folkestone and Hythe on his opening speech, and also would particularly like to thank Theo Clark, my friend and former colleague, and Louise Thompson for their campaign on maternity safety. They have shown incredible bravery talking about their experiences and challenging the taboos around the troubles related to pregnancy. In particular, I want to commend Theo for her talk about the perineal injuries, because this is something that has been that's spoken about in hushed tones and quietly amongst women, and really not something discussed in the public arena, but something that once spoken about in the public arena enables other women, their courage, which enabled other women to show the courage to come forward and talk about it. And that is how we will ensure that these injuries become less likely and their treatment becomes better. So I want to thank them for their work on that. The petition, since its launch, has received over 150,000 signatures, including 270 from my constituency. As a parent, I know that bringing a child into the world is one of the most rewarding and exciting experiences in one's life. And as has also been said, it generally goes well, it generally goes reasonably smoothly, if not completely smoothly, and the outcome is generally good. But for too many women, their experience is deeply traumatic. Every year, 30,000 women suffer negative experiences during pregnancy, and Madam Chair, 1 in 20 of those go on to suffer from PTSD. The Birth Trauma APPG ran an inquiry into birth trauma, soliciting 1,300 submissions. What it detailed painted a shocking picture. It spoke of mothers left unattended to in hospital beds, some left in their own blood or faeces for hours on end. Vaginal examinations undertaken without consent, in some cases triggering a mother's waters to break. Mothers belittled, concerns torn from the records. A baby dying during delivery after concerns were raised 44 times in vain. And significant mental health consequences and debilitating effects of perineal injury. Madam Chair, every single failing we've heard about today is one too many. As I said, maternity care is generally safe, but it's not safe enough yet. I am proud that the previous government did identify maternity care as a priority and began making some improvements. There is a way to go, but the previous government launched a maternity and neonatal safety strategy funded the Saving Babies Live Care Bundle, setting out evidence-based practices for providers and commissioners of maternity care in England, and rolled out maternal medicine networks in 2023, establishing 17 centres of excellence to help women with high-risk conditions get the care that they need when they need it. The previous government's reforms were backed by £127 million of investment specifically for maternity and neonatal care, much of that focused on the workforce. And Madam Chair, because of these efforts, more babies were delivered safely than ever before. Between 2010 and 2022, stillbirths fell by 25%, and maternal mortality fell by 17%. These improvements in large part were overseen by my friend, the Right Honourable Member for Godalming and Ash. He saved countless lives with these improvements and deserves much credit for that. I am concerned about the trajectory we're currently on, because there is still, as has been said, quite a lot left to do. In June, the Health Secretary agreed. He said that we're not making progress fast enough on the biggest patient safety challenge facing our country. But he's responded with another inquiry. He did say it would be a rapid inquiry, but it took months, in fact till September, to decide which trusts would be involved in that inquiry, and then that was changed in of itself. It was announced almost a year ago, and it's been much delayed, and it's still not reported. Now, hopefully it'll be a great report when it's reported, but the delay means that action is not taking place enough. In her interim report, Baroness Amos, as has been mentioned already, found that 748 recommendations have been made over the last decade, but progress in delivering them had been too slow. So I wonder if the Minister could update the House on how many of them remained undelivered at the point of the general election, and how many she has delivered since. In June, the Ministers also announced a maternity and neonatal task force, and Chair, I tabled questions in November asking how many times the task force had set and how many people who was on it, and the answer was they hadn't decided yet. In January, the question was raised again, and they still hadn't decided. It took until last month for the government to decide who was going to be on their urgently created task force from last year. I will give way.
Michelle Welsh.
Will the honourable member agree with me that getting the task force right by working with the families, which has never actually happened before with any government, is one of the key things? So actually getting the task force and all of those right, working and getting the right people on those task forces is actually essential as well.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
I thank the Honourable Lady for intervention, and I completely agree that it's important to get the task force right. I'm just not sure it needs to take quite so long to do so. We heard a statistic earlier on in the debate about how many babies are born and how often, and I think of how many babies have been born in the intervening time while these membership was being finalised. And we'll give way again.
Michelle Welsh.
Given that there are over 2,500 families involved in the Nottingham inquiry, some of those that were never reported appropriately, does the honourable member agree with me that that's why it's important to get that task force right? Because so many, under the previous government's watch, so many bad things happened that weren't reported in inquiry, and also weren't reported in the statistics and data that she's spoken about.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
I understand the Honourable Lady's point, but I think that the putting together a task force is a job that shouldn't take months and months and months and months, because it's too important that we get on with it quickly. So what was the reason? The Minister might be able to give the reason for the delay herself, because if that's hitting the ground running, they must be wearing lead boots. I also want to talk about the workforce. The Labour Party had a commitment in the manifesto to 1,000 additional midwives, thousands of additional midwives that would be trained. So can the Minister confirm how many more midwives are in training now than were in training under the previous government, and how many additional places have been funded for study in each year? How many will be available for this September? And also, some midwives have spoken about the lack of availability on some shifts of the more senior midwives and the balance of care. So can the Minister talk about what figures she has on the number of midwives who are now in more senior roles not providing clinical care, and what proportion of midwives are still spending at least a day a week providing clinical care? We know that the midwives, many of them, are not happy with the government's proposed 3.3% pay awards, and health unions have called it a betrayal and an insult. With the resident doctors already on strike, what is the Minister doing to avoid yet another industrial dispute, which I worry would contribute to poorer maternity care? At the same time, the government plans to reorganise NHS services, and the ICBs have put them under financial pressure. Can the Minister confirm what effects that she thinks that's going to have on maternal and maternal mental health services used by women? The government promised 1,000 new specialty training places. How many of those that have been cancelled were for obstetrics and gynaecology? And will the delayed workforce plan, when it comes, have details of the number of obstetrics and gynaecology trainees that are needed, and will it have a plan to deliver the right number so that we have the best number of doctors for care? Honourable members talked about the fact that the births are becoming more complex. There are fewer births, but there are more complex births, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask what the Minister's plans are for prevention, things like ensuring that women have folic acid. We know around 4 in 5 women do take folic acid, but what can be done to improve those that do not? Smoking, again, the government have give government credit for the tobacco and vapes bill, but what is being done in particular to target women who are planning a pregnancy or indeed are pregnant to try and reduce the smoking? Obesity and the effects of chronic illness are also important in making pregnancies as healthy as they can be. And with the members and the government's focus on prevention, I wonder if the Minister could update the House on what's being done in those areas. Workforce culture, I thought the speech by the Honourable Lady from Morecambe and Lonsdale explained that extremely effectively. It is really important that where errors happen, and I agree with her, errors will always happen, that the response to those errors is honest, open, transparent, that those who blow the whistle are safe to do so, and that the balance between accountability and blame is in just the right place so that we get an improvement in maternity care. And I do share her concerns about this normal birth culture. Listening to women, as many have said, is important, and I did ask the Minister the other day, but I don't think I got an answer about the abolition of Health Watch and this group of organisations, because organisations will always try and represent their interest group as best and most effectively as they can. But there may be women that fall through the cracks, and the benefit of Health Watch is it will listen to all and any women, whereas groups will represent cohorts of women and may not therefore cover the whole cohort. I also wanted to ask about travel. It's not uncommon where there's a baby with a cardiac, neurological, surgical or extreme prematurity, for the baby to have to be transported quite significant distances, sometimes hours away from their home, from their parents' home, in order to receive the best care. And that can be very difficult and challenging for people in terms of the cost of travel, but also in terms of accommodation locally to those units. Now, some of these units have excellent accommodation on site in the hospital for mothers and fathers who have a baby who's particularly sick, but others do not. And I did ask some written parliamentary questions about this following the neonatal estate review, but I got answers back about bereavement suites, and bereavement suites are a slightly different, well, they are a different issue. And can she, I've heard examples of women being asked to stay on the postnatal ward in the examples where they have a baby on the neonatal unit. And clearly it being in a bay, as one woman described to me, being in a bay with 3 other women who all have their baby with them. And in this particular woman's case, being told to stop pressing the buzzer for help past a cesarean section because there were other women with babies that she needed to look after, was particularly cruel, I thought. I think, in summary, Chair, I understand that the Minister is very dedicated to this cause. I'm sure the Secretary of State is, and we all are. But I do feel that the delay and the report and the endless inquiries are not creating the actions that we need. And I'd be grateful for the Minister's response.
Minister Karen Smith.
Thank you, Ms Jardine. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship this afternoon. Can I thank my honourable friend, the member for Folkestone and Hythe, for responding so ably on behalf of the petitioners to this committee. Those thousands of people who have wanted us to talk this afternoon, many will be watching, many are in the gallery, demonstrates really how important this is and how much this issue touches on so many of our constituents. And I'm grateful to my own constituents in Bristol South for also doing that. And can I also place on order my thanks to Theo Clark, who's also in the gallery, who I know did a lot of work in this area when she was an MP based on her own experiences. And I would agree with the opposition spokesperson in detailing in a way the injuries and raising some of those taboos with really a great service
to other women as well. And also thanks to Louise Thompson, also in the gallery, for the time and effort she has put into campaigning for improvements in maternity care following her own experiences. And all those organisations on behalf of women who are bringing forward their stories to national attentions, they do a great service. It's not an easy thing to do, and we thank them for it. And it's also been raised by the Honourable Member for Esher and Walton, Morecambe and Lonsdale, Alderman Sale West, and Shipley, who all highlighted the experiences of their constituents. And so to be very clear, the Secretary of State, that there is a meeting with Louise and Theo to meet with him who obviously he leads on this work directly, and discuss this particular issue more thoroughly of a Maternity Commissioner. And I do encourage both Theo and Louise to continue to engage with the national investigation chaired by Baroness Amos. You know, it is the fact that the campaigning, along with so many, is what has led the Secretary of State to directly provide the leadership himself and make sure that this issue around what petitioners have called for gets that attention. And we look forward to Baroness Amos's recommendations. Because as many people have said here this afternoon, the vast majority of births are safe, and there are some outstanding examples of care in the NHS. But where things do go wrong, it can have a devastating impact on women and their families who are at their most vulnerable moments giving birth. And we are fighting systemic issues, entrenched inequalities in maternity care, a failure to learn from mistakes, and culture and leadership. And it is appalling, as we've heard again this afternoon, how in the 21st century in Britain there could be such a difference in outcomes between mothers from different ethnicities and those from deprived backgrounds, not least in constituencies like mine, and a point very ably made as ever by the member for Clapham and Brixton Hill. As she said in her work in leading the APPG, does an amazing amount of work to highlight this. And can I confirm to her that we remain committed to closing that gap, at that target to close that mortality gap, and will be informed by Baroness Amos's recommendation on that. The issue around deprivation and ethnicity differences was also raised by my friend, the member for Rochdale and for Worthing West. And that is why my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State, launched the national investigation into NHS and maternity and neonatal care, chaired by the noble lady Baroness Amos. And she is bringing together the findings from past reviews, from local rapid reviews, and new evidence from families and staff into one clear national set of recommendations. And as the member introducing debate from Folkestone and High said, some of those previous issues and scandals have produced many recommendations, and as we have heard since 2015, well over 700 recommendations into maternity care. And as my friend, member for Shipley, reminded us, some of these investigations have been going on, and this information has been going on for well over a decade. So we know what needs fixing, but changes to processes and procedures here and there aren't enough. And there is a risk that some recommendations might fix the symptoms, but not the underlying causes. And many colleagues have talked about culture. I agree with my friend, with the Honourable Member for Rossendale and Darwell. We can't keep going round the same cycle. There is an underlying cultural issue, and systemic change needs to happen. And can I commend him for his work that he does on the APPG and sharing the loss that he has suffered with his family as well, informing that work. My friend from Mansfield also talked about that culture and the need for deeper questions, and we also talked about the culture and the need to speak up, and I agree that my friend from honourable friend from Morecambe and Lonsdale highlighted the importance of that culture being able to encourage people to speak up. In February, I will briefly.
Anna Dixon. Thank you, Minister, for her responses. Does she agree with me that training as a team, obstetricians and midwives together, is an important part of creating that unified culture that we know is so important to underpin safety for mothers and babies?
I do agree with her. I do think that's an important point in culture and in clinical roles and clinical leadership, both within the secondary care setting and across the entire pathway to support women. And that's very much what we want to do as part of our 10-year plan, is put in patients across all parts of the NHS front and centre, so building services around people, not expecting people to build their lives around services. In February, Baroness Amos published her interim report to share the insights she's gathered so far, and she and her team have met with hundreds of families as part of the local investigations, and a national call for evidence for women and families has recently concluded. The surveys were open for 8 weeks, hearing from women and families across the country about their experiences of maternity and neonatal care, and there have been over 11,000 responses submitted. A separate call for evidence for those who work in the maternity and neonatal pathway was also held recently. The workforce call for evidence received more than 9,000 responses from across 124 trusts. Her final report, including one coherent single set of national recommendations, will be published in June. And some of the women and the families who have fed into the national investigation will have suffered terrible loss and harm. This subject is just about the hardest any woman could ever talk about. And I want to thank all of those who've had the courage to share what they've been through. And can I thank again the inspiration that's provided by my honourable friend from Sherwood Forest in, first of all, getting herself here to continue to use her voice and doing it so well since her time in Parliament. All of these women and their families deserve to know that their voices will be heard and action will be taken. And that is why the government has launched its new maternity and neonatal task force, chaired by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State. And it will be the job of the task force to translate the investigation's final recommendations into action. And the task force will also hold the system to account for improving outcomes and experiences for women and their families, because it's all very well coming up with more reports, but we've had enough of these. And the task force will develop an action plan so that recommendations from the investigation do not gather dust on a shelf. And I can update the House that the task force held its first meeting on the 24th of March, which, as I understand it, was very positive and constructive. The terms of reference have been agreed, with meetings every 6 to 8 weeks going forwards. And Ms Jardine, the task force is made up of experts and key partners from across the maternity and neonatal sector and the wider health sector. It includes representatives from harmed and bereaved families, frontline clinicians and academics, royal colleges, and those who can speak direct to health equity and international expertise. The voices of families, and women in particular, must be paramount throughout this process, and the task force will be supported by several expert reference groups, at least 5 of which include representatives from harmed or bereaved families. And I agree with my honourable member for Sherwood. It is important, Sherwood Forest, it is important that we got this right and worked across this field so that this becomes a once and for all work. We want to end the cycle of recommendations that don't deliver. I think that's what we all want, and we've heard a lot of that this afternoon. And that is what the task force is designed to do, to ensure the systemic and national changes we need to see are achieved following the investigation's final report and recommendations. But we're not sitting on our hands until we get to that report. A number of initiatives are already in place to improve experiences and outcomes in maternity and neonatal care. We have, as we've heard, already recruited over 800 more midwives, begun investing over 140 million to address critical safety risks on the maternity estate, and we are rolling out programmes to tackle discrimination and racism and avoidable brain injuries. The way in which we're going to get the NHS improving is through that consistent improvement, week on week, month on month, or year on year. And the renewed Women's Health Strategy, which we've heard talked about this afternoon as well, published last week, will tackle the injustices women faced head on. We acknowledge in that strategy much of what we've heard again this afternoon, that medical misogyny we have acknowledged, and that women are not listened to, and that culture needs to change. And as my friend the member for Ribble Valley noted, the importance for choice for women. The strategy sets out how we will bring a relentless focus to deliver women's priorities. And the challenge for this government over the next couple of years is not just to build on the progress already making, but to accelerate it and to go faster. I want women who signed the petition to know we have heard them loud and clear. We know there's so much more that needs to be done. Don't judge us on the strategies we publish or the people we appoint. Have to be judged by our results. And Baroness Amos has given us the blueprint to making things better, and the task force will hold us to account. We won't just have one person driving action, there'll be 18 of them. In the meantime, we will not make significant commitments that preempt the outcome of the investigation, which we will have in just 2 months' time. If Baroness Amos wants to recommend, for example, a maternity commissioner, then we would, of course, consider that carefully. The task force, with the Secretary of State personally chairing it to drive accountability, will be the one that delivers the action that we all need to see.
Tony Vaughan to wind up.
Thank you, Ms Jardine, and I thank all colleagues who contributed to the debate today, and thank again the petitioners Theo Clark and Louise Thompson and the 153,000 signatories across the country who have brought this debate before Parliament. It's been a crucial opportunity to debate how we improve maternal care, and that is a very valuable thing that's been brought about by the petition. Ms Jardine, there's been unanimity among all speakers on the urgent need for action, the experiences of the petitioners, of our constituents, and the mountain of evidence we've all heard about, which leaves us in no doubt that action to address these long-standing and entrenched problems is long overdue and extremely urgent. The Minister and Baroness Amos have rightly accepted that the challenges we face are systemic, and that a whole system view looking at people, culture, organisation, processes and infrastructure is needed. And we've heard many honourable members talk about the ways that those problems have been kind of manifesting themselves in their own examples. The Minister has said that the Health Secretary will chair the task force composed of 18 experts to provide the accountability and oversight which the petitioners are calling for. I would ask the government to have the task force in place as long as is necessary for us to see these changes. I think one of the things the petitioners have said in relation to their proposal is that it would be a sort of permanent thing, their Maternity Commissioner proposal. I don't know whether there is a time limit to the task force, but I think it's really important that it is in place for as long as is necessary to see the change that we all want. The women's health strategy, as I said in my opening speech, is to be welcomed, and it's important that all the strands that are talked about there we've heard about, particularly the disparate impact on minority groups and also other groups like disabled groups, etc., who are losing out in the way the system is currently delivered, also have to have their needs taken account of by those strategies. But I will end it there, but again, thank everyone who has signed these petitions and for participating in the Petitions Committee process, which I think does quite successfully allow members of the public to participate in our democratic process. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered E-petition 751174 relating to a Maternity Commissioner. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order. Order.